All right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the ICF Training and Technical Assistance Team is honored to welcome you to this California Housing and Community Development Community Workshop offered through the Emergency Solutions Grant Coronavirus Relief Consulting and Staffing Services Contract. I am Kimberly from ICF, and I will be hosting today's session. Today's training session is part of our new and non-traditional providers workshop series where we will discuss ESG and ESG CV admin. It is my pleasure to hand the presentation over to our first presenter, Gordon.
Thank you very much, Kim. I appreciate it. Good morning, everyone. My name is Gordon Levine. My pronouns are he, him. I am white and Jewish, and I am excited to be here with you all, as well as being a lead homeless services specialist with ICF. Would my co-presenter, Mike, like to take a moment and introduce himself?
I sure will. Thanks, Gordon. My name is Michael Thomas. I am also a lead homeless services specialist with ICF. I use he, him pronouns, and I am also happy to be here with you today. Thanks.
Sounds good. Let's go ahead and get started. And while we're doing that, those of you in attendance, if you could take a moment and just drop your name, pronouns, and the agency that you work for in the chat. We'd love to see who we're presenting to. It's always fun to know who's in the audience. On which subject? Next slide, please. All right, so unlike previous new and non-traditional sessions, this is only an hour and a half rather than 2 hours, as the subject in question, admin, simply has less to talk about on the front end. In previous trainings, we talked a lot about participant eligibility, for example, and there are no participants here. And so we're going to do 1 full hour and a half with no intermission in the middle. I certainly made sure that I had my peanut butter and jelly sandwich before I sat on down, and I encourage you all, if you need a moment in the middle, to go off camera, get up, stretch, get yourself some food, and do whatever you need to make sure that you stay for our slightly extended but also slightly compressed presentation. During the first half, we will be talking about ESG activities in general, the COVID-19 waivers as they apply, and I think they barely do at this point, some best practices around administrative activities, and then in the second half, we will be doing our traditional lightning round and Q&A, where you get to test your knowledge against what we've discussed today and ask us questions about admin. Next slide, please. So there are multiple layers to ESG rules and regulations that start at the HUD level and trickle on down. This training is focused on subrecipient administrative activities and is most applicable to HCD's direct subrecipients and organizations that receive ESG funding from those organizations, which are sometimes called sub-subrecipients. Next slide, please. So just a quick key vocabulary overview. These are some acronyms and terms that we are likely to use repeatedly throughout the day. ESG is the Emergency Solutions Grant Program. ESG-CV is Emergency Solutions Grant dollars through the CARES Act. Admin is the common abbreviation for administrative activities. You'll also hear admin costs. FY stands for fiscal year, the year in which ESG funds are allocated by HUD. CAHCD, or just HCD, is the California Department of Housing and Community Development, which is the largest ESG recipient in California. HUD is, of course, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, the ultimate funder of ESG. A recipient is an entity that receives ESG directly from HUD. For our purposes, that means HCD. A subrecipient is a local government entity or nonprofit that receives ESG from a recipient. These are sometimes called grantees, and you can have sub-subrecipients and sub-sub-subrecipients, and you can go all the way down that chain, but broadly, they're just subrecipients. And finally, my favorite acronym in the world, UGLUG, which stands for a unit of local government. It means, for example, your local health or housing department. Next slide, please. So this is one of my favorite graphics that came up in our very first new and non-traditional presentation. It's just a quick overview to point out to you that when we talk about ESG, it's not like there's one rule book. ESG is, in fact, or ESG regulatory and policy bodies, rather, are the result of an interaction between 4 separate and distinct bodies that play with each other and depend on each other but are distinct. federal uniform guidance, primarily in the form of the 2 CFR 200, also sometimes called the Omni Circular, the ESG program interim rule, which is at 24 CFR 576, and where most of ESG's federal regulations are defined, HUD guidance, which is this large additional body of policy and practice that HUD has released to help you implement ESG effectively. And finally, your local policies and procedures, which is a pretty long runway, starting with California state policies and moving through HCD policies, your subrecipients written standards, and finally on down to your own project policies and procedures, all of which sounds like a lot. At the end of the day, all of them have to agree with each other, and genuine compliance is ensuring that your project is operating in ways that are consonant with all of those. And what I'll say is, broadly speaking, each representative or each entity that is responsible for one of these is generally responsible for making sure their piece of the pie agrees with the slice next to it. So broadly speaking, once you get down to the project policies and procedures, you can assume that the next thing up has inherited most of what's correct from everything up above. Next slide, please. So on to administrative activities basics. And as you can imagine, we had just a dickens of a time trying to find administrative costs as a stock photo. And so what we've chosen to do instead is to give you overhead shots of things. So this is overhead cupcakes, not an eligible cost. Next slide, please. Administrative activities, according to the ESG program rule, the recipient, meaning again HCD, may use up to 7.5% of its ESG grant for the payment of administrative costs related to the planning and execution of ESG activities, which is in the interim rule. One caveat that I do want to put on this, and I think we missed a slide on this, I just simply wasn't thinking about it. This is applicable. I think this entire presentation actually is only applicable to annual ESG. Which is to say the normal ESG that's awarded on an annual rhythm through HCD. None of this applies to ESG CV because ESG CV, hang on, that's not true. We're talking about match. I'm completely off book. Nope, we're good. This is relevant. The thing I was going to say was about match. I apologize for getting that backward. Next slide, please. So administrative costs overview. Admin pays for the costs of managing and administering ESG-funded participant-serving and HMIS activities. So what we mean by that is you run a rapid rehousing project. You have HMIS funding that is involved with entering participant data into HMIS. You have an emergency shelter, you run street outreach, you do homelessness prevention. All of those are participant-serving activities, meaning that you do a thing that helps a participant either remain in or return to safe and stable permanent housing. There are costs that are not directly participant-serving that are necessary for the project to operate, like, for example, supervising the folks who are delivering the actual activities, having somebody prepare your budget, applying and reporting on ESG funds, putting together your ESG contract for your subrecipients, and so on and so on. Those activities, which are not participant-serving, but which are directly related to ESG, are admin costs. They're administrative costs that are tied to the grant, but don't involve delivering services to participants. The amount, as I said, cannot exceed 7.5% for HCD's entire ESG grant, which means all of the ESG money going to HCD for the state of California. Admin cannot exceed 7.5% of that total amount. HCD retains a portion of that and subcontracts a portion of it to subrecipients, who may then decide to keep or subcontract some, all, or none to their subrecipients, and so on down the line. Generally, admin covers any ESG covered cost that is neither a direct service to participants, and HMIS activities are considered direct services to participants for this purpose, or a cost that is otherwise eligible under any other ESG component. So admin covers anything that isn't directly serving a participant and anything that anywhere else doesn't cover. And we're going to get into the nuances of that in a little bit. Next slide, please. Which takes us to eligible activities. Mr. Michael Thomas.
Thank you, Gordon. So yeah, now we will talk about the specific eligible activities under admin as we start off with this nice overhead shot of your cup of coffee there. So what is eligible? In a very general sense, and this is spelled out in the regulation, these are the things that are eligible under admin. So you've got general management, oversight, and coordination, training on ESG requirements, activities related to the consolidated plan, and environmental reviews. In more detail, under general management, what we see from the regulation is that it says costs of overall program management, coordination, monitoring, and evaluation. These costs include, but are not limited to, I want to point that out really heavily, but are not limited to, necessary expenditures for the following. The examples, say that again, examples that we have here are salaries and wages of recipient and subrecipient staff. We're going to talk more about that on the next slide. Travel costs for monitoring subrecipients, administrative services performed under third-party contracts and agreements. So here we're thinking about things like legal services, accounting, your auditor, stuff like that, and other goods and services for administering the program. So that includes things like equipment and insurance, utilities, office supplies, office space rental, and maintenance. You know, a common thing you would see there is something like your office printer that is being used for the ESG program and things like that. I do want to, you know, again, point out that but are not limited to thing is very important here. This is designed to be a flexible category of admin. So what you really have to do is look at what you're doing for your ESG program, decide if it is applicable to a direct service component, and if not, but it is being reasonably done to benefit the ESG program, it might likely fit here under admin. So it is designed to be a flexible activity within ESG. As we move on to salaries and wages, here are some more specific examples of the salaries and wages, the activities tied to salaries and wages that you might fund under admin. Preparing and amending program budgets and schedules, developing systems for complying with program regulations, developing subrecipient and contractor agreements, performance and compliance monitoring, reporting and document submission for HUD, responding to audit and monitoring findings, evaluating outcomes against objectives, and managing or supervising people whose primary responsibilities are for any of the above. So if you are the manager of 3 people who carry out all of those things I just talked through, that manager's salary for managing them doing those things is also going to be eligible under admin for the portion of their time that they spend doing that management over them. So again, you'll notice that there are things here like developing systems for complying with program regulations. That is also a relatively flexible thing for which you can pay salaries. Developing a system might look very different from one subrecipient to the next, but those activities are still eligible. So again, just pointing out, flexibility is the key here. That is intentional. And so just keep that in mind when you're thinking about admin. So other eligible activities, training on ESG requirements. And that means providing training on the ESG requirements, so on the direct requirements of the ESG program, and that can be HUD requirements or requirements of the recipient, the entity that you contract with, attending training on ESG requirements, so the costs that are necessary to attend such training, and attending HUD-sponsored trainings. There's an asterisk there because we are going to talk about that in more detail later. So if you were wondering what is a HUD-sponsored training, we will tell you later in the presentation, so keep that in mind. For the consolidated plan, preparing and amending the ESG and homelessness-related sections of the CON plan, those are eligible activities. We are going to touch on that a little more later as well. And then environmental review, the cost of carrying out environmental review responsibilities that are mandated by the ESG program interim rule are eligible here. And now back to you, Gordon, to talk about best practices.
Thank you very much. And I must point out that past me did current me a favor, because this was the same picture we've been using for requirements and best practices for a while as a stock image of practice, but it is also an overhead shot. So it really ticked both of the boxes there. Next slide, please. All right, so common admin expenses. This is a regulatory level point. So as we said, salaries for staff and project supervisors, as well as other admin staff who are doing project work, budget and invoicing, contracting, reporting, and that includes both upward to HCD and downward to subrecipients. And that does include reapplying for ESG funds every year to HCD. Training, as Mike discussed, and more on that in the next slide. Note that admin expenses are not restricted to specific costs, and other costs may be eligible if they meet the general standard, as Mike said, and I'm very grateful that he was at pains to make this clear. Admin is intended to be flexible about what is allowable as long as it meets the general standard in the interim rule. Next slide, please. So, excuse me, eligible and ineligible staff costs. So staff costs are restricted to those staff who are engaged in program administration. And you're probably sitting there thinking, well, duh, we just had that conversation and that's pretty obvious. It's called admin costs. This is the #1 thing that people get wrong in admin. And I urge you, if you hear nothing else from us today, please hear this slide acutely. Admin commonly includes staff supervisors, program managers, budget specialists, grant and contract admins, and others who provide services directly to the grant. For example, if you have a lawyer who spends an hour reviewing your annual contract, that hour is billable to ESG admin. A budget specialist, for however much time they're spending on the grant, is billable to admin. Supervising staff who are providing direct services, billable to admin. However, admin typically excludes executive directors, CEOs, CFOs, and other C-suite staff, operations directors, HR directors, and other staff who have broad organizational responsibilities. And this is where organizations sometimes get tripped up. Admin is intended to be used to support the ESG grant directly, even if that support is indirect support to participants. It has to be tied to the ESG grant. It can't be, or our organization has to exist for this grant to exist, therefore anything anybody does at our organization is an eligible admin cost. Admin cannot be used as a slush fund. It has to be tied to the grant. And so back when I monitored ESG, for example, anything that was billed to anybody whose job title started with a C was a flag. If it was just an hour or two, that makes sense, right? Like your CEO or your CFO might spend a couple hours every year on ESG, like reviewing performance reports or looking at the contract or reviewing a budget. That makes sense. But if there were recurring charges from a C-suite staff person or somebody with director in their title, I would start asking some pretty incisive questions. And dollars to donuts, what I would tend to find is that if the housing director at even a medium-sized organization was billing 25% of their time to ESG admin, that often meant that some of that time was being billed incorrectly. The exception to this is you're not always wrong to bill your executive level staff's time to ESG admin. If staff have direct grant admin duties, time can be spent on those duties and billed to ESG. So for example, if your CEO is doing contract review, then yeah, that's an admin expense. You can bill that to ESG admin for that ESG contract. It's unusual. It's more common for smaller organizations, I will say. And so for smaller organizations, and I've seen a few of these that like their whole deal is they run one emergency shelter and all they get is ESG and like a small grant from like the Rotary Club or a local religious association. And that's their whole deal. And their CEO is also their program manager and also their night manager and also their budget specialist. And also they serve the food. Like that CEO is getting a pass. I'm not concerned about that. But if you are a larger organization and you know that you have somewhere in your staff billing to an executive. To make your monitoring life easier, just say that up front and stick a note in your monitoring file that says we spent this amount of money on director level staff or up that was tied directly to these ESG admin activities. It's going to make your life a heck of a lot easier. Next slide, please. So training. This is a regulations thing and a best practices thing. So under ESG, the entire grant, training can only be funded using admin and to an extent HMIS, but that's a different topic and we're not talking about it today. So just here, training and admin, and you're broadly in the right ballpark. Provision of training is restricted to training on ESG requirements. Attending training is restricted to, quote, HUD-sponsored ESG trainings, end quote. So HUD-sponsored, until very recently, meant that HUD had to come out and put something in writing that says, we bless this with the crozier of our funding source. That's changed. HUD-sponsored now means, is currently understood to mean, that either HUD has officially sponsored the training, same as always, or that at least one HUD staff person is presenting at the training. So if there's somebody who's employed by HUD who's presenting at the training, then it's HUD sponsored. You assume that it's sponsored because HUD's there. It wouldn't be, HUD would not send staff to attend and present at a training that they are not also sponsoring. It's tautological. So those of you who have been in the ESG universe for a little while are looking at this and saying, hey, this is the other point of pain around admin for us, that like, we can't fund training, we have to train people, and ESG is a big funding source, and we can't train people with ESG except through admin, and we get like $20 and change in admin. What are we supposed to do? How do we like equip people to be good at the stuff you require us to be good at? And the answer to that is training could be thought of, for example, and this is how I think of it. It's not the definition of it, but it's a useful way that I find to think about it. Admin can be used to fund training, which could be interpreted to mean formal training, like going to a place and sitting in a room and listening to a person, or doing a module on your computer, or reviewing training materials at your desk. Training that is formal, structured. Informal training, which is again is not a term anywhere in the ESG interim rule. It's not an official term, but informal training, and it is absolutely fundable under not admin, as long as it is fundable justifiably under a different component. The most prominent way to do that is through what I generally call peer learning. So a common use case is under ESG, you're required to use the local coordinated entry system. Training on coordinated entry is an ESG requirement, so you can pay for it with admin, but you're already using all of your admin dollars to fund your budget specialist. How do you train your staff who have to use coordinated entry system on using the coordinated entry system if you don't have any money to do it? One way to do it is through peer learning. So an example of that is if you are an emergency shelter recipient. You have funding under emergency shelter, which can fund, among other things, case management. You have a participant in your shelter, and that participant is ready, according to the local coordinated entry policies and procedures, to be assessed and prioritized for housing. There's absolutely nothing wrong with your case manager saying, hey, I'm going to do this. Can this person over here from this other organization who is good at this sit in and talk me through this process? That's peer learning. And, you know, the other way around. I share this, so same participant, but their case is being managed by the case manager at the shelter, but also by an outreach case manager who had worked with them in the past. The outreach case manager knows all about coordinated entry. They've been doing it for 5 years. They're an expert. There's no reason not to say, let the outreach worker take this one, and I'm going to sit in. And as we're doing that, we're going to talk this through. And This session will take longer than usual, and I will learn as we go. Now, obviously, you want to make sure that the participant's okay with that and that it's done in a way that is trauma informed so that the participant doesn't, for example, get freaked out that there are 2 case managers rather than 1. There's trauma informed and participant centered ways of framing that. But peer learning, using things that are otherwise eligible like case management and outreach activities to learn as you go, is a way to talk about training without talking about training. So there's my spiel on totally non-admin related things on admin day. Next slide. Admin and cash match. But so this is best practice. This isn't a regulation thing. Fundamentally, the ESG program does not provide enough admin. Doesn't provide enough admin for HCD, doesn't provide enough admin for anybody downstream. I've never been in the community that was excited to say, yeah, we got tons of admin. We have like way more admin than we need under ESG. That doesn't seem to exist. The most common solution to this is cash match. So other critical thing that I want you to hear today, this is the other important takeaway. Match is not provided on an activity by activity, budget line by budget line, or project by project basis. Match is provided by HCD to the grant as a whole, which means that it doesn't matter what expenses match, what expenses are recognized as match at any level, as long as the match commitment is met. So HCD has to provide match equal to 100% of the grant less $100,000. That match commitment could be met by all admin, or mostly admin, or a lot of it with admin. And so if you as a subrecipient get $50,000 of ESG and 2,000 of that are admin, you're not capped at $2,000 of admin match. You can provide $50,000 of admin as match, $50,000 of cash match, $50,000 of in-kind services as match. If you have a lawyer who's doing pro bono work, that's in-kind services to review your contract for the year, or an accounting firm that's volunteering their time, that's in-kind services under admin. This is the most common way to deal with the fact that there simply is not enough admin to go around for anybody. And so looking at your grant and thinking like, how can we use our match to meet this need is really going to be your first port of call to make sure that you can do all of those activities that you absolutely need to support the grant, training and budgets and contracting and supervision and all of the rest of it, so that you can get the actual direct services done. Next slide, please. Okay, so sharing requirements. This is both regulatory and best practice. Sharing requirements for the ESG program are defined in the ESG program interim rule. Those sharing requirements apply only to the recipient, which is to say HCD. Subrecipients do not have sharing requirements. You are not required to share admin with your subs, and whether you do or not is at your discretion, and it could be based on a variety of factors. As a best practice, subrecipients should consider sharing as much admin as possible while retaining enough to fund their activities. How much that is, we can't really speak to it any more narrowly than we already have. But just to recognize again that there really simply is not enough admin to go around at any level. Next slide, please. So finally, a special note on this non-participant serving term that we're using. So homelessness prevention, street outreach, emergency shelter, and rapid rehousing are sometimes called participant serving components because they provide direct services to participants. ESG is usually discussed in context of participant serving grants. You'll say, for example, my organization has an ESG rapid grant, or my organization is an ESG funded shelter. Admin is not participant serving. You would never say my organization is an ESG funded admin organization. That doesn't make a lot of sense, right? Even if it's true for a subrecipient pass-through, for example. So for subrecipients, admin is really supplemental funding on top of project funding, in the same way that HMIS funds are supplemental for anyone that is not an HMIS lead. So think of admin, or rather think of homelessness prevention and all the other participant serving components as coffee. Admin is cream or sugar or whatever you like to add in. It's the thing that makes the coffee a little bit more to your taste. It's what gets the coffee to the place you want it to be. Next slide, please. Which takes us to our lightning round and back over to Mr. Michael Thomas.
Gordon. And so, as we mentioned, we are not taking an intermission in this training as we have in previous ones. So we are going to jump right into the lightning round today. So let's get into it. Just laying the ground rules first, though. We're going to put up a question. You will have a poll that will pop up on your screen. Choose the answer that you think is most appropriate. And as always, want to note that these are completely anonymous. We cannot tell who is choosing which answer. So feel free to throw out any guess that you want. We will not know who you are or what you answered. So let's get into it. Our first question is, oh, and I should also mention, there is a naming convention as always. So you, if you can figure out the naming convention, drop it in the chat. Where did we get these names from? And the winner gets a shiny gold star from the ICF TA team, which I'm sure is the most valuable thing you could hope for this morning. So the question is, Anthony Borelli, the ESG program manager for California HCD, is trying to determine how much of the upcoming year's annual ESG grant can be spent on administrative activities. So how much is that? How much can be spent on administrative activities at the recipient level? Is it 3 3/4, 7.5, 11, or 15%? Choose the answer that you think is best. And we've got about 50% of participants who have answered already. Good job, everyone. Thank you for your active participation. Can we get a few more? I'm just going to hope for a few more. Yeah, there we go. Thank you, everyone. Look at that. Well done. Going once, going twice, 60%. Good job. All right, let's wrap it. The most popular option by far was option 2, and I want to take just 1 second to recognize the correct answer on the naming convention already. Well done. That is the fastest anyone has ever figured out our naming convention, I think.
I'm gobsmacked. This was easily the hardest naming convention thing that we've ever done, and that is an obscure character. That is an obscure character. I would very much like to know in the chat how on earth you came up with that, and allow Mike to finish the question.
That is fantastic. All right, so back to the question here at hand. Option 2 was by far the most popular answer, so let's take a look. Option 2 is, of course, the correct answer to that question. Up to 7.5% of a given year's annual ESG grant can be spent on admin. That amount is a cap, not a requirement. Recipients can spend less at their own discretion.
I can't get over the MASH thing. I fell out. I'm done. Oh my
That was
God.
That was pretty great.
That was unbelievable. That was Michael Jordan with the flu, right? That was unbelievable. He is notorious. That's true. You're absolutely right. Wow. All right. To the next question. So Blake is an ESG program specialist for HCD. He is trying to determine how much admin to subcontract out to local government subrecipients for the coming year. How much admin is a state ESG recipient required to subcontract out? How much are they required to subcontract out? Dr. Borelli, for those of you who are curious from the previous question, was a guest star on a second season episode of MASH in which he was playing a visiting surgeon. Dr. Borelli was played by the father of Alan Alda. So there's a little weird tweaky MASH charmingness to that too. Yeah, 5 gold stars. I almost said I would give 5 gold stars to anybody who can get it from this. Was concerned someone would Google if I did. But sheer genius won the day. If the poll is closed, I have lost the poll somehow. There it is. Okay. The consensus is option 4, looks like, overwhelmingly. Let's have a look at option 4. Incorrect. State ESG recipients are required to subcontract admin. As all the other options were very undervoted, let's have a look at the answer. So state ESG recipients must share its administrative funds with subrecipients that are units of general local governments. The amount that is shared must be, quote, reasonable under the circumstances. The regs do not define reasonable and do not require state ESG recipients to share admin with subrecipients that are not UGLUGs, and non-state recipients, as well as subrecipients of all types, are not required to share admin further. They may choose to do so, but they're not required to do so. But state recipients are required to share, but they must do so in accordance with what is, quote unquote, reasonable, which is, of course, a pretty flexible standard. Next slide, please.
Okay, next question. Charles manages a subrecipient's ESG rapid rehousing and ESG administrative funds. A portion of his time could arguably be charged to either ESG rapid rehousing or ESG admin. How should Charles charge that portion of his time? It can be reasonably argued that it could be charged to either of those things. How should it be done? Options there are charging it to rapid rehousing, charging it to admin, charging, or whichever is specified by the project policies.
Mike, you're blipping in and out a little bit. Mike, can you hear me?
I can.
Yeah, you were blipping in and out a little bit. You seem like you're back.
Oh, sorry about that. I was not saying anything of incredible value.
Oh, I disagree.
So it looks like we've got option 3 is pretty popular there, followed by option 4. So we're going to check out option 3. Sorry, that is not the correct one. Option 4 was the next most popular choice. Sorry, that is not correct either. And then there were a couple of votes on option 2. Unfortunately, also not the correct one. So that leaves us only option 1. Let's take a look at why. If a staff person's time could reasonably be charged to either admin or any other component, then it can't be charged to admin. And that's because the ESG program interim rule says that admin does not include staff and overhead costs directly related to carrying out other component activities, and because those costs are eligible as part of those activities. So basically what we're saying here is that if you can reasonably discern that the activity can be charged to a component other than admin, because admin's not a component, it's an activity. If it could reasonably be charged to a direct services component, that is where it should be charged, not to admin. So that is why that is the correct answer here. On to the next question.
Thank you. So Dorsey is an ESG subrecipient. He has questions about which costs are eligible under ESG general management. Which of the following costs are not eligible? Salaries and wages of subrecipient staff, travel costs for monitoring subs, other goods and services for administrating the program, such as equipment and office supplies, and office space rental or purchase, maintenance, and utilities. Which of these is not eligible? I have to say this question is genuinely cruel, wicked, evil. In keeping with the Halloween spirit, it is the trick question. There is later a treat question, in case anyone is curious. This is the trick question.
Given the overall context so far, I am really excited for that treat question that you're talking about. I think it's going to go very well.
I feel good about that. I was not sure about it before, but my confidence is bolstered. Folks are still taking a moment answering. I'm going to give just a little while longer on this one because it's tricky and it's good to get folks engaged. I want to see if we can get 20 answers in. We got 20 people here. Just one more person. Can we get one more answer?
Very even distribution of answers that we had there.
I think it shut itself down. Yeah, I think the poll accidentally closed. Well, we did have an even distribution of answers. It looks like the most common, it looked like 4 was slightly ahead. So let's have a look at 4. And 4, incredibly, is exactly right. So let's have a look at, we got 20 answers. 4 was exactly right. Let's see why 6 of you are geniuses. So this is a trick question. While office space rental is eligible, as are maintenance and utilities, office space purchase is explicitly not eligible. Additional explicitly eligible costs under general management include admin services such as legal, accounting, and audit. But you can't buy yourself an office using ESG admin, though you can lease it and you can maintain it once you've got it. Next slide, please. Good job, everybody.
Yeah, well done on that one. Okay, Erica is an ESG subrecipient. She manages an ESG-funded emergency shelter. Which of the following is not eligible under ESG administrative services? I am not going to read all of those out to you because they are longer answers and you can see them there on your screen. But what I will tell you is that only one of those is not eligible under ESG admin. So which one of those do you think it is? This is a tougher one, so I completely understand if the answers are coming in a little slower, but we are getting there. I have 17 answers. And with Gordon, I would like to see at least 20. Can we get 2 more? 22, there we go. We've hit the mark. We can close it whenever we're ready, but it looks like there's some more coming in. Option 1 was the most popular, so let's take a look at option 1. That is the correct answer. Well done, everyone. Let's see why. It's because monitoring participant progress would be eligible under the emergency shelter component of the program. So it is not an eligible admin cost, even though qualitative information about participant progress is an important part of performance monitoring, which is eligible under ESG admin. So what we want to think through here is that in theory, this could be a complex and challenging area, because really when we talk about that conversation that we referenced in the question, it sort of depends on who's having that conversation with the participant. What is the primary purpose of that conversation? And does it tie directly only to monitoring, to case management, that sort of thing? So again, in theory, this could be very complex. But what I'd like for you to take away from it is that in practice, because admin dollars are almost always going to be far more limited than program dollars, the answer that you usually want here is that this should be charged to the emergency shelter component. And in the vast majority of cases, that is going to be the clear answer here. That was the clear answer to the question. So well done, everyone. Good job.
All right. Frank is an ESG specialist with HCD and has been asked to provide input into HCD's consolidated plan. Is that an eligible activity under ESG admin? And I ain't going to read all that. So go ahead, take a moment, read through the options and let us know what you think. Much like Frank Burns himself, this question is also just a little weaselly, so read carefully.
I do want to note while you're answering, there are some questions coming up in the chat, and I'm just flagging those at this point for the Q&A at the end, because I think we probably will have time to talk through these rather than try to go back and forth in the chat. But I just want to flag that for you. So we are noting those, and we will get to them at the end. All right. We got 50% there. Like we stopped, the answers have kind of stopped coming in. Or we want to wrap that one up?
It's closed. Do you see it
Okay,
up there?
sorry. I might be having an issue on my end then. I didn't see it close. Sorry about that. So it looks like, let's see, are you doing this one, Gordon?
Gosh, I am. I'm sorry. You had cut
No
in.
worries, didn't want to take it from you.
I had track switch in my head. All right. The bare majority of you said option 3. Let's have a look at that. No, I'm sorry, not quite. The next most popular answer was number 4. Have a look. No, not quite. Why don't we switch slides and have a look at what the answer was? So ESG admin can fund the cost of preparing and amending the homelessness-related sections of the consolidated plan, which includes but is not limited to the sections on ESG. Be aware, however, that 24 CFR 91, which you would have never read probably, governs the consolidated planning process, does not explicitly state a requirement that recipients consult with its own ESG staff. It is a best practice, it's a common practice, and ESG staff frequently write the ESG and other homelessness-related sections, but it is not actually mandatory. So just be aware that ESG can absolutely fund it, but it is not technically a requirement. The requirement is that the recipient participate, not that the individual staff who are responsible actually do the work. Next slide, please. Over to you, Mike.
Thank you, sir. Goldman is an ESG specialist with California HCD. He has been asked to provide a unit-level environmental review for a subrecipient's ESG rapid rehousing project. Conducting environmental reviews is one of HCD's functions. Can and should this be charged to ESG admin? This is a very tricky one too, and there are 2 parts to it. There's the can it be and should it be part. So think about both of those as you're looking through your answer options here. So we're saying yes, it can and yes, it should. Yes, it can and no, it should not. Yes, it can and no, it should not. Or no, it cannot. And those are all for different reasons that you can read on your options there on the screen. Pick which one of those you think is most appropriate here.
This question's also just a little cruel, come to think of it.
I thought this was the toughest one of the bunch.
Yeah. Really, any question about environmental review is difficult.
Really is.
Yeah.
Let's see, we've got 14 answers. There we go. Got a few more coming in. If you have no idea, feel free to just take a shot. Pick a random one. We have no idea who you are or what you're answering. And even if we did, I don't mind. All right. I think we've probably got enough to take a look here. So it looks like we had option 3 and followed pretty closely by option 2. So option 3 is the correct answer. Well done on a very tough question. Let's take a look at why that is the case. While ESG admin can pay for environmental reviews should be conducted at the project level for ESG rapid rehousing, not at the individual unit level. Conducting those reviews at the unit level is very time consuming, it's expensive, and it delays participant access to housing. and it's ultimately unnecessary to do it at that level. So again, ESG admin can pay for the reviews, but doing it at the project level is, or I'm sorry, doing it at the unit level is just not a great idea. It should be done at the project level.
It's back to me, and yeah, that would be really my third takeaway from this one is don't do environmental reviews on a unit by unit basis. You don't have to. It's asking for so much suffering for absolutely no gain, and you don't have to. All right. Hawkeye is the operations director, and this is where we assumed you would get the theme some 7 questions later. Hawkeye is the operations director for a small ESG subrecipient. From time to time, he helps out with ESG contracts and fund requests in addition to his organizational responsibilities. Can Hawkeye's time be charged to ESG admin? Again, you've got some yeses and nos. Go ahead and give those a read. Take your time and show us what you think. Answers streaming in. Okay. Overwhelmingly, all of you said option 2. Let's have a look at option 2. Option 2 looks correct. Let's have a look at what the answer is. No, I'm sorry, that's wrong. Hawkeye would never do paperwork. He only took the chief surgeon gig because his ego wouldn't let somebody else do it. It was a Charles Emerson Winchester issue. And at the end of the day, Hawkeye provides outpatient physical health services, which are eligible under an ESG component and are therefore not eligible under ESG admin. So the 80% of you who said option 2 were wrong. And the one person who said option 4, Hawkeye would never do paperwork, is the real winner. I think that wraps us up for the day. No, there's another slide after this. Let's have a look at the next slide. Oh, there's a real answer. Yeah, the real answer is that executive directors, operation directors, and other C-suite staff can, in theory, charge actual time spent managing or administering ESG to ESG admin, but it's unusual for larger organizations, which is exactly what 80% of you said, plus one person who knew that Hawkeye would never do paperwork. Moreover, even for smaller organizations, organization leadership charging more than a few hours to an ESG grant can be a flag during monitoring. It's not necessarily wrong, but it's not necessarily worth the hangover, if you get my drift. Thank you all for paying attention during that slide earlier. It is very clear that you took this to heart. Thank you. It will save you heartache later. Next slide, please.
Okay. John Trapper McIntyre works for an ESG subrecipient. He would like to learn more about the local COC's coordinated entry system. So which of the following is not a way that ESG can pay for him to do so? So ESG wants to pay for him to learn more about the COC's coordinated entry system, and one of these is not a way that that could happen. You see on your screen there. PD could use admin to host a training on coordinated entry requirements in general. Trapper could attend a local coordinated being presented by Norm Suchar, because we've seen him do not many of those for local communities, right? He is the director of HUD's Office of SNAPS, for those who did not know. Trapper could learn more about the coordinated entry system while case conferencing over a shared participant with COC-funded staff, or use ESG participant serving component funds to pay for training, as the subject in question is also participant serving. Only one of those is not a way that that could happen. I appreciate any Norm Suchar reference in a presentation.
Well, I figured the Trapper question had to have a little bit of a prank in it.
We got one more. Someone give me another answer, please. Thank you. We can wrap it up now. So we've got option 4 coming in as the most popular. So let's take a look here. You guys are on fire today. This might be the best streak we have had in one of these presentations for correct answers, and it is fantastic. Well done, everyone. That is the correct answer. Generally speaking, ESG can pay for training using admin dollars, but only on ESG requirements and only if it's HUD sponsored. Peer learning is also an option, as Gordon discussed earlier. This is often a challenging area for subrecipients. The most common advice for meeting the need is using cash match or unrestricted funds. But although it is usually a challenging area, clearly everyone here was paying attention, and we really appreciate that. Well done. All right, back to you, Gordon.
Yep, back to me. Max Klinger is an ESG subrecipient. They do not receive enough ESG admin to cover their admin-related costs and would like to use cash match to close the gap. How much cash match can Klinger provide in the form of ESG admin eligible expenses? Is it up to the percentage of ESG grant funds that are admin dollars, 7.5%, 50%, or 100%? What do y'all think? Yeah, all of y'all are on your games today. Quick with the answers, quick with the right answers. Two more, looking for two more, looking for one more. Do I have one more? One more? Do I have one more? That's 20. All right, option 4 was the most popular. Let's have a look. Option 4 was correct. Let's have a look at
another correct answer.
I know, let's have a look at the answer. All right, under ESG, as we said, match is provided for the grant as a whole, not on a component by component basis. Recipients and subrecipients can and commonly do provide up to 100% of their cash match in the form of ESG admin eligible expenses. I will speak to the 25% of you who said that it was up to the percentage of admin in the grant that you received. It's important that you know that that is a restriction that does not actually exist. You can provide as much match in the form of admin as you need to make sure your grant runs. So don't impose restrictions on yourself you don't need to, and look to your match as a place to fund the stuff you need to fund. Next slide, please.
And question 11. Margaret is a new ESG subrecipient. She will be running a street outreach project and would like to know how much admin she will be receiving. How much, or how should Margaret find out how much admin she will be receiving for that project? Should Margaret ask California HCD's ESG staff, ask another ESG subrecipient, check the previous year's contracts to former ESG subrecipients, or check the ESG program interim rule for the ESG admin cap? What is the best way to find out how much they will get?
This is also a bit of a cruel question, come to think of it. Admin questions are hard to write. They're either extremely obvious or very difficult, not a lot of in between. Teetering right on the brink. Half of y'all have it right. Just a few more answers. We incidentally have no idea who is answering, so we just see numbers.
Just numbers.
Oh, just over the.
There's a tight spread there between option 4 and option 1, but option 4 won by 1 vote. So let's take a look at that. That unfortunately broke the streak. But the other close contender was the correct answer. Let's take a look at why that is. You should always check with the ESG recipient staff about a given funding year's admin allocations to your organization. That's the important thing there, to your organization. The statute, or I'm sorry, the regulation shows what the recipient can use for admin. But when you're a subrecipient, you've got to check with your contracting agency. Recipients have significant leeway in defining how much admin subrecipients in general and specific subrecipients. So they can do it across the board or look at individual organizations, and they have leeway to determine how much they will receive. So while the ESG program interim rule and California HCD's policies and procedures are good places to start, the most up-to-date information will come from your grant management specialist. So if you have questions about how much you're getting, then you should contact your representative at California HCD. And I want to note, the next slide is where we're going to start talking about questions and question and answer, but I do want to note before we move over to that, this is the final training scheduled in this new and non-traditional series. In the event that others might be scheduled, then you will be notified, but we want you to know that this is the final one on the schedule. There will be no more this year, and there are no more currently scheduled. So we appreciate everyone going through these with us and listening and paying attention and engaging in our lightning rounds. We really appreciate it. This is the final one. Thank you very much. And now we will move on to questions and discussion. And we've had a couple come up in the chat. And I've got one here. So there's one about indirect costs that I think I can probably handle. I don't know, do we want to do that one first, or would you like to start off with one, Gordon? I've got one I can throw your way too.
Why don't you toss me the one that we knew was coming, and I'll get it out of the way right away. How about that?
Perfect, sounds good. So the question was, if I'm helping the housing supervisor with questions regarding a specific client's eligibility status or allowability of specific costs, then does that become billable under a direct service component? So like shelter or rapid rehousing?
That was totally not the question that I meant.
Oh,
yeah.
I'm sorry.
No,
Sorry about that.
If I can't answer this one off the cuff, then I should get off the mic anyway. So the question is really about if the person who's asking the question, Louise, if they're helping the supervisor with questions about a specific client's eligibility, does Louise's time become billable under emergency shelter or rapid rehousing? And I think she may have meant like admin or project. So let's abstract that question a little bit. If somebody who is at the sort of executive or directorial level is helping a housing project supervisor in relation to, you did mean project. So the question is about allowability. Interesting. Okay, so the question is, does this become allowable under a direct cost? So, okay, so if somebody at the executive level is doing project level, is helping a supervisor with a project level question, is that project level work, or is that supervisory work, or is that admin level work? God, I wish I had an ad hoc poll to throw up because it's such a good question. You know, it really depends, is the honest truth. It depends on whether what you're doing is providing training, or whether you're digging into the case, whether you're providing supervision, or how involved you are in the activities. It is a little bit of a gray area. Generally speaking, though, if you are doing something in relation to a specific client, that is probably a project level activity, because there's no way to get down to delivering project level services without it being, there's no way to get down to delivering specific person services without it being a project level activity. So there is some wiggle room, and as in all situations where there's wiggle room, there's space for a note to file that explains the thinking. But generally, I would say that this is a project level expense, probably. Mike, any take on that?
No, I think you are right. I think there is some gray area there, but I like your conclusion there. Nothing to add.
Cool. All right. Well, I think we've got an indirect question for Mr. Michael Thomas himself. The question was, for subrecipients who are not governmental bodies, we have admin activities like these, but they land in our indirect allocation, which is not a lot of money. are admin and indirect interchangeable for the purposes of this training?
So the quick part of that answer is that they are not interchangeable. Indirect and admin are two separate concepts, and they can't be swapped out because they are very different. I'm going to say before I go forward that it's kind of outside the scope of this presentation to provide the level of detail that you probably need to figure this out completely, but I will get you started in that direction. So when we talk about them as separate concepts, one of the easier ways to think about it is that admin is an activity that can be a line item on your budget, right? So your budget can have a line item with an amount for admin. There is not going to be a line item for indirect costs. Indirect costs is it's a cost allocation strategy. And there is a percentage allowable for your organization to charge for indirect costs if you are choosing to utilize an indirect cost rate. And so admin is not the only line item that indirect costs can be charged to. You can charge indirect costs, and again, there's a lot of variables here. It depends on what's been approved for your project. It depends on your approved budget. So I'm speaking in general terms here. But in general terms, indirect costs can be charged to any line item that is part of your modified total direct cost. And that's where I'm going to stop in this presentation, because we could go down a whole other rabbit hole with modified total direct costs and things like that. The point I really want to make here is that indirect costs can be charged to admin. They can also be charged to other line items. So admin's not the only place that you can charge those. And that's why it gets very confusing, because there is a percentage that's allowable for admin, right? But then indirect costs is also a percentage. But they're two very different things. They're handled in very different ways. And that's where I'm going to stop for the purposes of this presentation.
Any interest
Anything you want to add there, Gordon?
No, not even a little bit. I was just going to say, I think Louise updated just a little bit in the chat in the event that you want to follow up on that, or if you would just want to leave it lie.
So let's see. If there's no eligible area, since admin is excluded. So again, what I want to point out is that if you are using an indirect cost allocation rate, admin is not the only line that can be charged to. It can be charged to other lines in your budget, provided that those lines are part of your modified total direct cost. There's a really good document out there that I don't have the link for firsthand, but I believe it was written by our partners at MDG, and they are experts at this. And it does a really good job of breaking down how that works and like what your modified total direct cost is. But what I'm getting at here is, even if you have zero admin in your budget, there are still places you could charge indirect costs.
Cool.
And it looks like I will have to dig up the link for that, because I don't have it offhand, but yes, I think we should be able to provide that.
And it's tricky. And I guess I personally would not be totally shocked if we revisited the subject at some point, which is not a promise about what is coming up, just making very sure everybody hears that. But in general, I wouldn't be shocked if it came up again. So as Mike said, this is our last new and non-traditional training session for the year. The year itself is coming to a close, and so is this series. I myself will miss seeing this on my calendar. As much fun as it is developing 60-slide PowerPoints and dropping them on people's head to review, and genuinely as much fun as it is spending this time with y'all every month. We will miss this, and we're looking forward to what our next TA engagements look like with you all. We are going to close down in a bit. We do have a few more minutes. I'm just sort of launching into my ending spiel, because we're looks like we're rounding the bend, and I can see Kim off of or back onto her mic. Do we have any final questions? We're happy to take them in the chat, happy to take them on voice, on admin, or really anything else you need, because you got us for another 18 minutes. And thank you all for
Anything
the
related
kind
to
words.
MASH?
Oh, I'm sorry, Mike, go ahead.
No, I just was welcoming anything related to MASH.
Yeah, let's talk about match for 18 minutes, which I'm totally unable to distinguish between admin, apparently. Yeah, no, thank you all for your kind words in the chat. I'm glad, and I'm sure we're all glad that this has been valuable to you all. Certainly with unidirectional presentations like this, we're never quite sure how it's landing, and so we appreciate the kind words and we appreciate the kind words and the critiques both, as really our goal is to be the best TA providers we can be for all of you every time we have the opportunity to. Last call for questions. All right, well, going out on a nice, short, sweet session with a lot of good answers. Back over to you, Kim.
Thanks, Gordon and Mike. Thank you all for attending this California Housing and Community Development Community Workshop session offered through the Emergency Solutions Grant, Coronavirus Relief Consulting and Staffing Services Contract. Look out for more information on if we will be doing the new and non-traditional providers workshop series during next year. A 3-question survey will pop up at the end of the session. Please make sure that you complete that so we can get your feedback to ensure that trainings are useful as possible. Thank you all, and remember this is the last session, and if there are any other sessions, you'll be receiving an email from us. Enjoy the rest of your day.